College football is basically here, and we here in the South are absolutely obsessed. And my guest here details that obsession quite perfectly in his new book, How a Regional League Became a National Obsession. Colby Newton, kind enough to join me here. Welcome to the show, Colby. You, by the way, have a very SEC last name, so this fits perfectly.
I love it. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate you having me on. Excited to talk football. We made it.
Yes, we certainly did. It's been a long, arduous journey through the summer, and thankfully the Olympics got us through. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have been doing for the last month. But I want to mention this before we get off and running. Colby is giving away a free copy of the book to the first person that comes up to him and mentions the Zoneheads podcast or In the Zone. Or you can mention my name, Brandon Kravitz. So you've got three options right there: Zoneheads podcast, In the Zone, or Brandon Kravitz. Colby, where can they find you for this sweetheart of a free deal?
Yeah, I will be at Spellbound Bookstore in Sanford on Saturday from 12:45 to 1:45. And like you said, Brandon, the first person that comes up mentions any of those things, your name or the shows, I will give them a free copy of the book. Absolutely.
That's awesome. Mention that name one more time.
It's going to be Spellbound Bookstore in Sanford.
All right, got it. I love Sanford, by the way. Let's go back to the beginning here. The SEC was founded in 1932. Did not know that until I started looking into your book. How did that conversation come to be, and why was the league formed originally?
Yeah, they were all a member of the Southern Conference, and that league had swelled to 23 teams, and there started to be disagreements basically along geographical lines about how the league should be run and the emphasis that athletics should be taking in each institution's philosophy. And 13 of the schools felt like it should be run one way. And they said, we don't like how you guys are doing it. We're going to start our own conference. And they dropped the news on the rest of the teams in 1932, late 1932, officially early 1933. And the SEC was born with those 13 teams, 3 teams left over the next couple of decades to give kind of those 10 OG teams.
And so some of these programs, I've heard this discussion over the years that some of these teams in the SEC just simply don't belong to be in this great conference. Ole Miss, I see the helmet right behind your head right now, maybe could qualify, even though they're highly ranked going into this year. Vanderbilt certainly. Who are those teams, the perennial bottom dwellers, or the teams that are always disappointing, that were just simply there, right place, right time back in the 30s?
Vanderbilt's a great example. They were the power in the 1920s, and Tennessee had a hard time beating Vanderbilt until they hired General Neyland. So Vanderbilt was very much right place, right time, winning lots of games in the 1920s, and was a power in that Southern Conference. So when the league split off, they were very much in a position of power. Ole Miss is another one I love that you brought up. They had a fantastic run in the 1950s with Johnny Vaught and winning all sorts of games and league championships at that point. So they also at that time belonged in the league. And some of them, like in Alabama, have just always been a power. Other schools like an Ole Miss that now has risen back up, even a University of Florida, the Gators have kind of had their times where they've been really good and then have also struggled. So Auburn's another one that just was at the right place at the right time. And they weren't even playing home games in Auburn. They had to play sometimes games in other states, including Georgia. So it was really an interesting look at what happened to get the league off to the start that they got off on.
Was Florida one of those OG schools, or did they end up getting into the mix later on?
Florida was one of the originals. Absolutely. They just didn't have maybe the success that they ended up having in the 60s when Spurrier was a player. And then obviously later on when they started winning national championships, they had some moments here or there, but Florida actually was instrumental in creating the league, even though they didn't have necessarily the national cachet that an Alabama did at the time, or even a University of Georgia.
The SEC has since become the most dominant conference in college football, but when did that take hold? If the starting point was 1932, what was the starting point for owning college football?
Yeah, it was a slow burn, and it took the SEC a lot of time, in decades really, in making small decisions that helped propel them to put them in a spot that they are at today. I'll take you back to the 1930s. They were the very first conference that believed in putting games on the radio. Schools all over the country thought that that would hurt the attendance. And the SEC was the first league to really realize this is going to help build the passion. They were also the first league to give out athletic scholarships. So they had always been ahead of the curve. And then you fast forward into the 1980s, and they were the first league that really understood what it meant to take advantage of TV. And they made the decisions to expand. First league to really do that in the modern era. Conference championship game, and then the SEC on CBS. Those three in the late 80s, early 90s, I believe is what built the foundation so that all of a sudden in the early 2000s, they're winning the national championship every single year.
So when they say it just means more, in some ways what I'm hearing is we're just going to show it to you and give it to you more, and then you're going to want it more. And that was sort of the philosophy all the way through. I think maybe we're digging into the one-word phrase that's often used from the SEC.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think when you talk about that it just means more, it I believe has always meant more. The passion was there in the South. There was a lot of dynamics going on with the South still trying to recover financially. And then you look at a professional sports standpoint, a lot of these cities, even Atlanta at the time, did not have pro sports, the 30s, 40s, and 50s, like the big cities did in the North. And the first really 40 years of college football, if you want to go back into the early 1800s, late 1800s, was the North was the dominant region where you had teams in the Ivy League, and you had like the Michigans and the Notre Dames of the world winning national championships. So it took a long time for the South, but the passion, it was always there.
How important were players like Herschel Walker and Bo Jackson to that rise in popularity of Southern football?
Oh, I love that those were the two names you drew out. When I was a little kid, 1980, Herschel Walker's the very first football player that I can remember knowing who he was. So that was big. Bo Jackson, I think, was even bigger because Bo Jackson came to Auburn at the same time that television changed in college football, and the SEC was the first one to really capitalize on that, where you could see an SEC game on regional syndication in the morning, think like Jefferson Pilot. You had ESPN in the evening, and then at that time they were still with ABC, where Bo Jackson was on TV every week, and that player combined with being on TV all the time really helped move the league forward, both financially and with that passion that we're talking about. Those two guys were huge.
Kind of money would they be bringing in with NIL?
Oh, they don't even want to know, right? They don't even want to think about that right now.
I'm sure they were bringing in something. I mean, is that at all in your book that we've now lifted the curtain on paying players? But come on, none of us are that naive. This has been going on for a long time in just a very different way. Backroom dealings and bags of cash and all of that. And I would think, with the it means more and the passion of Southern football, and I mean some of the players that we just mentioned too, but there's a whole litany of them. You don't get great players, a lot of them, without paying for it. Do you cover that at all in the book? Just the finances behind the scenes that were probably the back room dealings that were probably taking place?
We didn't get into it too much. I'll give you two funny stories about that. You go back to the 1930s. USC and UCLA were mentioned because there were no athletic scholarships, they were paying students to do jobs like shovel snow off the steps of the Coliseum in LA. Like these jobs didn't exist, but they had to do what they had to do to get the players. So the SEC, ironically, was the first league that I mentioned earlier, said, let's give these guys athletic scholarships, give them a little something. The other thing that's funny about that point is Arkansas was the first school to leave one power league and go to another when the SEC decided to expand. The reason why Arkansas was frustrated with their current spot was because of what you just were talking about. The Southwest Conference imploded because they got caught doing what probably everybody else was doing, and Arkansas moved from the Southwest to the SEC.
Yeah, and is that sort of part of the rise too? Because that is a little bit before my time, but just understanding the history of college football, that conference, was it the SWC? Is that what they went by? Was that the power league at the time? And then the SEC was able to take advantage from there?
I would say they were on equal ground. I mean, you had Texas winning championships. Arkansas was a strong program in the 60s and 70s, and then Texas A&M. Also, historically, some other schools in that league. SMU had a great run in the 80s with Eric Dickerson and Craig James. But to poach Arkansas from that league and really send kind of a shockwaves throughout college football of like, oh, the SEC's for real. They're coming to get our teams, and that hasn't stopped, as we have seen over the last few years. They're still going to pick who they want and when they want them.
How much do you think weather has to do with the popularity of football in the South? It's a fall sport, outdoor fall sport, as opposed to baseball, which I've seen over decades in my life. As much as we try and make this work here, it just doesn't, because baseball is primarily played in the summer where it is suffocatingly hot outside. Do you think that that has anything to do with the overwhelming popularity of Southern football in the SEC, of course, being able to capitalize on that?
Brandon, I love that you are bringing that up. I've done quite a few of these interviews since I wrote the book the last few months. You're the first person to ever bring that up, and that is such a great point. And yes, I think that it absolutely played a role. It's fun to kind of put that up against what happens in the West when you talk about the weather in LA and Phoenix. Still good weather there too, but the passion isn't quite the same. So there are some other factors in play, but it just seems like it's the perfect match in the South. Like you said, weather's starting to cool off a little bit. We finally dare to go outside now and not, suffocate in the heat. And it's absolutely something that people love to do.
I think maybe my theory on the West would be that out there, the weather is so perfect and it's so beautiful outdoors that people they just kind of like take in nature more than. It's hard to be obsessed with nature in Florida because you're either going to get bit by mosquitoes or an alligator. There's not a lot of wiggle room there outdoors, but you can go climb mountains and walk trails and all of that. And I think maybe out West, just people are just more into this is now me just thinking on the fly. Colby, what do you think of this theory?
No, I like it, but they're wrong. They should be watching college football.
I agree.
Get inside your house and watch college football.
Right. Yeah. Stop looking at mountains, you loser.
Yeah.
All right. When you think about it, it is weird that fans chant the conference initials. Why is it that fans get so impassioned about the league as if it represents their team? And I think if some people are listening to this, you just answered your own question. If Florida or Georgia is in the SEC, then they are part of this conglomerate. It means something if that league wins. But you never hear Patriots fans or Chiefs fans chant AFC, and it's the same concept. So why is it that fans take on so much ownership of the league as if it's part of their team?
Yeah, I think it's not even like that in any other college conference. And until you have experienced it in person, I don't even think you understand the true passion and intensity behind those cheers. I had the fortunate opportunity to be in the bowl game industry for about 15 years, and I was on the sidelines of the Alabama LSU BCS championship game in the Superdome. The rest of the country is so fired up and mad that you got two SEC teams in the title game. I loved it, and every other SEC fan loved it. I don't know that there's an easy answer to that other than you got to go way, way back into the 20s and the 30s. The South and Southern football was disrespected from the very beginning. When Alabama got their very first Rose Bowl invite, they were the 5th or 6th team to be invited. They invited Northern teams. Some of those Northern schools said, no, football's becoming too important. Academics is more important, so we're not going to go. This is in like 1925, 100 years ago. And Alabama said, oh, well, it's important to us, so we're going to go. And I really think it goes all the way back 100 years to just the disrespect that people in the South felt that, hey, we're good at this sport too. Give us a chance to show it. And now they've got all the control and the power, and they're never going to give it back.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is passed down through generations, so I don't think that's outside of the realm of possibility. CBS was such a great partner for the SEC for so many years. Now we're going to get something that's completely different. ESPN is going to take hold of the biggest SEC games. How awkward do you expect that transition to be for longtime SEC fans?
Yeah, that's a big reason why I wanted to write the book. I mean, I love SEC on CBS. That was such a huge part of my Saturday to know that I'm going to see the best game of the day in the country, regardless of league, on CBS in the middle of the afternoon. Will ESPN/ABC be able to capitalize on it the same way that CBS did? Hopefully they can still put forward the SEC as a product. CBS did such a great job of showing the rest of the country the pageantry and the intensity and the local flavor of every single SEC game that they broadcast. ESPN will do a great job, I'm sure, as well. But I do think it's going to be a little weird in a couple weeks to hear that theme music on CBS and have it be followed by an Illinois-Michigan game. That'll take some getting used to. So I know fans in the SEC footprint are excited that kickoff times will be known a little bit earlier beforehand. So little stuff like that, I think, will add up and it'll be fine.
Eventually we'll get used to it, but it is going to be odd. I'm with you. SEC on CBS just had a certain feel to it. Colby is giving away a free copy of his book, SEC Football, How a Regional League Became a National Obsession, and you can go and find it if you're the first to mention the Zoneheads podcast, our live show in the Zone, or my name, Brandon Kravitz. The place is called Spellbound Books in Sanford. I got that right, Colby? Right?
You got it. Yep, that's where I'll be Saturday, 12:45 to 1:45. Come find me.
12:45 to 1:45 at Spellbound Books in Sanford. Colby Newton is the author. I appreciate the time, Colby. A great conversation, and enjoy the football season.
Thanks, man. You too. Appreciate you having me on.